Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Rudao Research Center for organizing this fantastic opportunity to have some very distinguished guests today. My name is Rébar Jaff. I have a PhD in international relations from the University of Ottawa in Canada. And I'm also a former secretary of the Disarmament Advisory Board of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, in New York. And I'm currently a senior government advisor based in Dubai. Very pleased to welcome the ambassador of Russia to Iraq today, where we'll try to have a few challenging, maybe not completely controversial questions, but that's exactly what we're here for. And as I was told, we'll have about 30 minutes to discuss, and then I'll give the audience about 15 minutes to ask questions. To introduce Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Elbrus Kotrashev is as I said, the current ambassador of Russia to Iraq. His first assignment in Iraq was from 2003 to 2005, during which he was an officer at the Russian embassy in Baghdad. He then returned to the Middle East in 2015 as an advisor at the Russian embassy in Damascus until 2018. And from 2018 to 2021, he headed the Middle East and North Africa portfolio within the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Moscow. And since April 2021, he has been the ambassador of Russia to Iraq based in Baghdad. And he's a graduate of the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Welcome.
Thank you. Just a small remark. I started with Middle East Department in 1998, and I first time came to Iraq in 1999. And since that time, I've never left Middle East. I kept working here all the time, Syria or Iraq. Just
great.
Small
well,
remark.
Welcome back. That's additional
I'm not a
information.
deserter. I never left Middle East.
Welcome back. The first question is, of course, we're going to talk about Ukraine. This is probably what is making the headlines around the world. Since Russia's war on Ukraine in February of last year, the United States has formed many alliances to impose a wide range of sanctions and export controls on Russia, and has discouraged other countries from dealing with Russia. How have these sanctions impacted your country's global trade relations, especially in the Middle East, which is the region that we're discussing for this forum?
Well, first of all, it's not war. If it was a war, I'm afraid Ukraine wouldn't have been existing up to now. So it is special military operation. Though it's not easy, it's quite a wide scale, but it's not a war. So just small remark, but very important. Russian military potential is enough to defend itself from much bigger and more dangerous states, which are on the map. So Ukraine is not a big problem in this respect. But what we're doing in Ukraine is special military operation, not a war. And just to prove this, I would say that if it was a war, no Western leader would have dared to visit Kyiv, just like, for example, American president did recently, and before him many other people. So this is an important remark. If there would be any questions about that, I'm ready to comment. Well, if we speak about this situation and its effect, well, it has bad effect on the whole world, and I would say that it would have lasting effects on world economy, world politics. So it's hard to speak about everything in this respect, but what I want to assure you is that the world will not be like it was before. After this conflict gets settled sooner or later. Finally, Russia has changed its priorities in terms of world politics. Previously, we relied too much on our relations and dialogue with Western countries, United States and Europe. Now we lost confidence in them totally. We are ready to normalize relations, but they won't be confident anymore. And now we're switching more to partners in Asia, in Africa, well, in the Middle East. I'm happy to say that the Middle East was always one of Russian foreign policy priorities, but now its importance is growing. And now we're having much better relations with many Middle Eastern countries, which were previously considered to be, for example, American allies and whose relations with Russia were not so good. Now they are very good with us. Thank you.
So you talked about, so you're not calling it war, but you're calling it a military operation. What exactly is the purpose of this military operation that you're referring to, and how do you think it's going to end? Where do you see the end of it?
Well, first of all,
or what does it take to end it?
I expected to speak about Russia and the Middle East.
We're getting there.
It's a much more convenient topic than Ukraine. But anyway, okay, if we speak about Ukraine, it is just to make you feel comfortable, you may call it war. It's not a problem, it's just a word. It is a provoked proxy war against Russia. We see it as an instrument in terms of making Russia weaker, and even furthermore. So I don't want to bother this audience with too many details, but for us it is existential problem. We are now struggling for the future of our motherland. We cannot lose in this conflict. It is impossible. So we'll use all potential we have. Up to now, we haven't used all potential Russia possesses, militarily and in other spheres. But if it continues, we'll use more of our potential, more of our strength. And in this respect, I would say I'm more worried about future of Ukraine, who is victim of Western policies and of stupid policies of its present leadership. Well, I'm not worried about the Russian future. And of course, we are upset about the negative impact of this conflict and sanctions on world economy, on life all over the world. But first of all, we are victims of this situation because sanctions are imposed on us, and we have to deal with these issues. And we have to search with our partners ways to continue our cooperation in terms of these sanctions imposed on us, well, including our partners here in Iraq and here in Kurdistan precisely.
What would you say are the 3 top priorities of Russia today in the Middle East, and more specifically in Iraq?
I mentioned this issue on this very conference, on the same conference a year ago, I think, or maybe 2 years ago, and it hasn't changed much, though importance of this region has raised. So, speaking in general, priority number 1 for us is Syria. Well, I think it is understandable to everybody. We are supporting, well, it is priority in 2 terms. First of all, we support Syria as a country, not militarily only, but economically as well. It is just a burden for us, but we have to carry it because Syria is our ally. Second, we deal with Syrian issue in terms of moving forward Syrian political process and finding solutions to problems caused by this conflict around Syria. And this is mainly done via Astana format, where we cooperate with Turks and Iranians, and this is effective format which allowed to, in fact, stop hostilities and fighting in Syria. So then, quite close to Syria in terms of importance, I can mention Libya. In Libya, we are supporting political process. It's going in a very difficult way. You know it. It's very complicated. But situation in general is improving. We've recently have taken decision to return our embassy to Tripoli. New ambassador was appointed. By the way, he used to work in Iraq in the previous era. So Iraqis in foreign policy in Russian foreign policy are everywhere in the Middle East. And we'll open probably consulate general in Benghazi. So we are trying to balance our relations with both parts of Libya. Hopefully there would be not more than 2 parts. There are some signs that it may become 3 parts, but hopefully not, at least not for Russians. These 2 countries are of top priority, not just because of their importance or Russia's special love to them, but because the situation in these 2 countries still imposes a threat and the challenge to world, to international security and stability. And in this respect, we have to pay attention to them. Just it's worth mentioning that in 2003, 2005, 2010, top priority for Russia in the Middle East was Iraq, because Iraq was very unstable. Iraq was a big problem. Iraq needed the attention and the support. It still needs, but alhamdulillah, what situation in Iraq is not so bad now, and it's improving, and I'm happy to say that. So in this respect, in terms of threats and security problems priorities, we can put Iraq a little bit aside. But Iraq is important to us. It is one of our priorities in the Middle East policies because it's a traditionally friendly country. We have very good political dialogue with Iraq as government and with Iraq as political parties and movements. We have a lot of friends here. We have long history of cooperation. We have interests in different spheres. First of all, in Iraqi oil and gas. Russian investors are biggest foreign investors in Iraqi oil and gas, and we are ready to develop this issue. So I can talk on this issue for hours. We don't have this time, unfortunately. Well, to speak about other parts of Middle East, so it's worth mentioning that we have improving relations with Gulf states. So it's a very good political dialogue with both Saudi Arabia and Emirates. This is what I witnessed personally, working in addition to diplomatic work as interpreter for Minister Lavrov and President Putin on different occasions. So we have good dialogue understanding with Qatar, well, with other Gulf states. Then we have traditionally strong relations with Egypt, Sudan, Algeria. In fact, any Arab country mentioned, it is our traditional friend, partner, and even in this very situation, when they come under huge American, European pressure in terms of joining sanctions war against Russia, all our Arab friends keep distance from this issue, and this is kind of support to us, and we are grateful for that.
How do you think, and then I'll have a question about Saudi Arabia, you also mentioned Saudi Arabia, but how do you think the relations between, or the role of the United States and Russia play out in Iraq? You both seem to have interests. How can the Iraqi government, how is the Iraqi government balancing that kind of dynamic in the country? And how is Russia's role and the US role playing out in the political sphere?
First of all, Iraqi government, present government and previous governments, they're masters of balancing, masters. And they managed to balance between United States and Iran. So Russia is not such a big player in Iraq compared to these 2 countries. And the government which manages to balance between these 2 powers, it can easily balance between Russia and the United States, because first of all, we do not demand from our Iraqi friends anything they cannot do. We are very realistic in terms of our cooperation. We understand that Baghdad is in a complicated situation, this or that way, and we never tell Iraqis to do something that they cannot do or they don't want to do. This is our principal approach to Iraq. So in this respect, it's not a problem for us to support our Iraqi friends in their efforts to balance between us and the United States. As for United States, well, we know they are continuing their sabotage efforts in terms of complicating or destroying Russian-Iraqi relationship. Well, they failed up to now, and I'm sure they will continue failing. Well, failures is a good American tradition, at least in the Middle East. As for issues of economic cooperation, of course, these sanctions imposed on Russia and threats of using sanctions against Iraqi sides, they make life more complicated, but they never destroy our will to work together. So now we are just searching for options and alternatives. In general, my impression is, I hope audience would not strongly disagree with me or even agree with me, that sanctions have become such a common thing in international life, I mean American sanctions, plus European, that now people are searching for alternatives and how to accommodate to them. When previously there were just few countries under sanctions, everybody avoided working with them because it was dangerous. Now, come on, the list of countries under sanctions, personalities under sanctions, different parties and movements who are under sanctions is so big that you cannot try to find alternatives how to deal with them. And this is, I think, one of signs of new international order coming.
In 2017, the Kurds of Iraq held a referendum for independence. In the lead up to that referendum, there was, an increasing type of mixed reactions from the international community. Some supported it, some were against that referendum. Russia did not issue any call to cancel the vote or to cancel the referendum. Instead, with the planned referendum just days away, Russian state oil giant Rosneft announced its latest investment to help Iraqi Kurdistan develop its natural gas industry for domestic supplies and eventual export. Russia's silence, was it a sign of approval or support for the Kurdish referendum or not?
First of all, we never betrayed our friends and allies in this country. And the referendum and what happened after that was a good example of what, for example, Americans do. That's just a remark, and you all know this. As for Russia, it kept silent because sometimes it's better not to say anything than to say anything. And sometimes silence is a bigger message than trying to say something which is not filled with any sense. I'm afraid I cannot give detailed comments on what we were thinking about this referendum, because at that time I was working in Damascus and I cared more about not being killed by a Nusra shell, mortar shell coming from Jobo region, just 4 kilometers from our embassy. But of course we watched what was going on in Iraq, and my impression is that this referendum was something unexpected for us, and we simply didn't comment because, well, any way you commented on this would be considered to be support to this side or that side, but we never interfere. It's a pure Iraqi issue. Everyone might have his position on that, but this is not state position, so anything Iraqis decide, it is their decision, and let them do it. What I think in general is that Iraq is a state with a big future and big burden of different problems which it has to solve. I'm happy to say that with all these challenges Iraq experienced for the past 2 decades in terms of American occupation, then Al-Qaeda war, then ISIS war, sectarian and ethnic tensions and cleansings. Well, all this crazy stuff's happening from time to time. Still, Iraq managed to preserve itself as one country, and what I see recently, after the end of this latest recent Insidat Siyasi in Iraq, I would say that it has big future, and we are ready to support it in its activities. So the only thing we say that all problems should be solved by political way through dialogue. Of course, dialogue takes place between sides who disagree. So in this respect, we know that Iraqi sides disagree on many things, but until they keep having dialogue with each other, and it's obvious all over Iraq, dialogue is going on. Well, between Erbil and Baghdad, between Erbil and Suleimaniya, inside Baghdad, south of Iraq, north of Iraq, well, Sunni, Shia, Kurds, inside of these houses. It's permanent dialogue, permanent political struggle, but up to now, I'm happy to say, it's more constructive than destructive, and let it be so.
You mentioned in one of the previous remarks your relations with the different countries in the region, including Saudi Arabia. Now, recently, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, said, he announced his vision for 2030, and his vision, one of the key pillars of the vision is to make Saudi Arabia a powerhouse and an example for the region. And one way in which he is doing that is moving away from the oil economy. Do you think this kind of transformation that's happening in Saudi Arabia should or will inspire other countries like Iraq to also move away from oil? And do you see that as a solution to Iraq's problems?
Well, I don't know, should I be happy or unhappy to say Russia is also a country which relies too much on oil and gas. And for us, it's the same problem. So if anybody in this region or in any other region decides to try to move from economy based on hydrocarbon to economy based on other kinds of industries and IT technology, so on, it's very good. But though it's not very easy, because just to sell a barrel of oil is easier than to create something else. Anyway, I don't have strong comment on this issue. I wish all the best to our Saudi partners. If they manage to do this, I would be happy to see it. And of course, it would be a good example to all countries all over the world, not just in this region.
Another question that's also kind of related to oil. During COVID, the price of oil dropped drastically. And any economy that was really heavily reliant on oil realized that oil is not the means of survival for many countries. After COVID, the price of oil started to go up again, and now it's a huge source of revenue for all the oil-producing countries, including Russia. And I know you wanted to focus more in the Middle East, but that oil is a good connection for the Middle Eastern countries and also for Russia. Now that the price of oil is higher, these oil-producing countries are making much more money. Is that what encouraged Russia to start this military operation in Ukraine, because you have the means to afford this kind of military operation because the oil is paying the finances of the oil, of the war, or the military operation, as you call it?
Absolutely not. The decision to carry out military operation was taken a year ago in February, because we had clear evidence that Ukrainian forces are going to attack Donbas region and to carry out ethnic cleansings there.
Perfect.
And the military operation was started in order to protect these areas from killings and murders from Ukrainian side. It has absolutely no connection neither with COVID nor with oil prices. I would say that most of things Russia does in terms of politics, it is not based on economic interests or on economic kind of agenda. And very often it is on the opposite. It's the opposite. It is not good for our economic interests and agenda, but we have to do it because it's our moral duty. Just to explain what happened in Ukraine, to make it obvious to you, well, Ukraine is not a country where just Ukrainians live. It is a multi-ethnic country. And the previously east of Ukraine, which now has become part of Russia, it is inhabited by Russians, people who are ethnically Russians. And there were millions of them there. The other parts of Ukraine, well, central part of Ukraine, it is mixture of Ukrainians ethnically and Russians and others. To the west of Ukraine, there are Western Ukrainians who differ a little bit even from Ukrainians in the center. So it is like a mosaic, this country. And for a couple of decades, yes, this ethnic issue was a card in their internal Ukrainian games. So one candidate for the presidency was supporting closer relations with Russia, his opponent for closer relations with Europe and United States, and they were struggling, gaining votes and so on, and it was good, it was acceptable. After coup d'etat in 2014, radical Nazi forces came to power in Kiev, and the first thing they did was to prohibit Russian language in Ukraine. Ukraine as a state had two state languages, Russian and Ukrainian, and it was comfortable to everybody. So the first thing they did in the country which suffered from economic problems and corruption and the political divisions and many other problems, the first thing they cared about was to prohibit Russian language. Imagine that in Iraq some government comes to power in Baghdad, and first thing they do, they prohibit Kurdish language all over Iraq, including this very Kurdistan. So what would be your response to that? And people in the east of Ukraine responded with a kind of intifada. They started protesting, and when they started protesting, Ukrainian army was sent to them and murders started. So they came under attack. They were peaceful protesters, and they came under attack from armed Ukrainian army. So in this respect, well, the difference between Kurds in Iraq and Russians in Ukraine, there's only one big difference. You don't have big Kurdistan next to you who could protect you when you came under Anfal and all these stuff attacks. Russians in Ukraine had this protector, their brothers in Russia, who came and supported them. This is what happened. And this happened in 2015. The Ukrainian army was destroyed. They panicked. They ran away. Combatants from east of Ukraine, they could have taken Kyiv, but Russian leadership told them not to do this. We still wanted the solution. And for 8 years, we tried to find solution between this Donbas region and Kyiv with support of Western countries like Germany and France. And later on it appeared that they were lying to us, cheating us for these 8 years. They were saying that they are searching for solution while they were searching for improving potential of Ukrainian army. And finally, in 2022, in the beginning of 2022, we've got evidence that they are going to attack. And that wouldn't have been civilized war which Europeans have between each other. That would have been second Yugoslavia. Because Kyiv regime declared that it wants Donbas land, but it doesn't want Donbas people, because all Donbas people are traitors. So, and anyone who considers himself Russian must leave Ukraine and live in Russia. Well, that was their official position. It is, you can find it easily in statements of top officials, leaders, including President Zelensky. So we had to protect them. That was the reason for this very military operation, not oil prices. We don't care about oil prices when our brothers are going to be massacred.
We're going to take some questions from the audience now. We have about 15 minutes. I'll start with the second row here. Yeah. And then I'll go left, right here. Yeah.
راح سؤال باللغة العربية.
I think he's fluent in
Okay.
Arabic, so you
Okay.
can go ahead. Yes.
سعادة السفير تحدث عن الأزمة السورية وكذلك تحدث عن مسار أسيتانا الذي أطلقها الرئيس بوتين شخصيا يعني في عام 1917 على ما أذكر، وعقد أولى جولات مسار أسيتانا بحضور كل من روسيا وتركيا وإيران وكذلك المعارضة السورية والنظام السوري أيضا. هذا الاجتماع الأول تقدمت روسيا بمسودة دستور لسوريا المستقبل. هذا الدستور كان يتضمن مواد كثيرة أشار فيها الروس إلى حقوق المكونات السورية ولا سيما حقوق الشعب الكردي، الذي أشار في هذا الدستور إلى نوع من الحكم الذاتي للكرد السوريين، لكن روسيا سرعان ما أدارت ظهرها لمشروعها هذا، وهذا الأمر يعني أصبح هاجسا لدى الكرد السوريين بأن روسيا صاحبة النفوذ الكبير في سوريا أدارت ظهرها لحقوق الكرد. بماذا يعلق سعادة السفير على هذا الأمر؟ وشكرا.
I will respond in English. I think that would be more convenient. Well, thank you for this question. I used to respond on this question each time I'm on some stage, talking to some audience. The situation is as follows. Russia is a federation which consists of regions. It's a federative country. We have absolutely nothing against having the same system of ruling in any other country which it chooses. So in this respect, it's natural for us that ethnic minorities should have kind of autonomous entity in the country they live in. So it's all okay for us. But devil is in details. Kurds in Syria are not, the positions of Kurds in Syria are not like what Kurds are having here in Iraq. Here in Iraq, Kurds have a territorial entity which can be called, this is Kurdistan, and it's clear. Well, in addition to some disputed areas which are not so big, the main part of Kurdistan is clear to everybody. No one would dispute this. In Syria, well, as a reality, it's not like that. Kurdish areas, they don't make one entity. They live in different places, and in many places they are not majority. This complicates the situation. So Russia principally supports the idea that rights of Kurds must be provided. I mean, economic, administrative, cultural, language, and political, of course, it should be. The question is how. And frankly speaking, Russians, those who deal with these issues for years, those who spend a lot of time in Kurdish areas, in Kamishli, those who spend a lot of time in Damascus, those who talk to different specialists, Kurds and non-Kurds, up to now, nobody can give us a clear picture how Kurdish region can be made in Syria so that it would be Kurdish, because anyway you try to make an entity, a Kurdish entity in Syria in the present day, you'll find out that it would have a lot of Arab tribes inside, and Kurds would not be the majority. Then what Kurdish autonomy can it be if Kurds are not majority there? That's the issue. And this question should not be addressed to Russia. We are supporting you and your rights, but tell us what can we do for you? Now the situation is very bad, I would say, and I'm very much worried about the future of our Kurdish partners in Syria, because they are now controlling territories which are not Kurdish. And these are huge territories with Syrian Arab tribes there, with the Syrian oil and gas, which is out of government control. And this is lasting for a long time, causing tensions between Damascus and Rojava and complicating finding the solution. That's the thing. And we I'm saying that with all confidence because we are mediators between Rojava and Damascus. It's us who know this situation, not Americans, not other guys who come to Kurds and say we are your friends and at the same time complicate the situation. We want this solution. We talk to both sides and we see that, unfortunately, we are more interested in finding solution between the two sides, but not the sides themselves, unfortunately. I'm talking to you as a friend. I hope that you won't misuse this political statement.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We'll go to another question. Someone that, the last hand, go ahead. Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. I have just one question about the economic ties between Russian companies and Iraqi federal government and KRG as well. You know, we have some state-owned Russian oil companies operating in Iraq and Kurdistan region like Oil, Gazprom, Rosneft. How those companies are paid nowadays, you know, given the US dollar shortage in the Iraqi economy and market and the problems and pressures put on Iraqi side by the US Treasury, how those Russian companies are paid? Are they paid by US dollar or just the products they produce? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. This is what I use asking them all the time. They never tell me. They say, we are miserable people, we are so poor, help us, but they never say how they get the money. I don't know it, frankly speaking. It seems to me that they may be receiving oil and that they manage to sell it somehow, but they don't tell even their ambassador. So businessmen are very tough guys in this respect. But thank you for the question.
Well, I think this was actually one of the comments that was made by the foreign minister of Russia who visited Iraq recently. They were trying to pressure, right, the Iraqi government to pay those companies, and the Iraqi position was that we will consult the Americans to see how we can pay you. But I guess the answer was
still
left
consulting.
there.
Still consulting.
Let's take the last hand over there. Yeah, go ahead. Duawa, Babura Shkuri Khan.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, if you can say your name and if you're with an entity, please identify yourself.
Julian Bichocha, reporter at Rudao English. Thank you for taking my question. I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the potential rapprochement between Syria and Turkey, given that you just touched on the Syrian Kurds and how the situation will impact the Syrian Kurds, because this can surely not be good for them. This will lead them to lose their territory. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this question. The process started last year. I'm not aware of the details, fortunately or unfortunately, but what I know is the following. At the end of December, we managed to organize a meeting in Moscow, on level of ministers of defense and intelligence chiefs of Russia, Turkey, and Syria. And it was good. Now we are preparing another meeting on the level of ministers of foreign affairs. And it would be not just these three countries mentioned, but Iran would be added. So it is becoming a quartet. In general, the idea is that it's high time for normalizing relations between Syria and Turkey. No preconditions are up to now on the table. Both sides are very careful in terms of what they are doing. But it's good that trust is coming back into relations between Ankara and Damascus. So when this issue was mentioned, for example, a year ago, Syrians would have responded, no, we don't trust them. But now they say, well, it can be, because we see that both sides are interested. Finally, they need to find solution. What makes us feel optimistic in this issue is that no matter what Turks did with different parts of Syrian territory, they never said that they don't recognize the unity and sovereignty of Syrian land. So in this respect, it's okay. How the solution would be found, I don't know. But the process is going. It is important that dialogue is going on. So, as for Syrian Kurds, I'm not aware about details of whether they are included in this scheme or not. Hopefully, this won't cause harm to them, because, well, if they are part of United Syria and they declare themselves as part of United Syria, then it would be okay with them, and Damascus would protect them from any hostilities. The problem now is with the Syrian Kurds that they live there close or together, they operate together with the American contingent, about 900, about 1,000 troops, plus maybe the same number, 1,000 private military companies or mercenaries. And this is what they rely on in terms of being protected from any aggression, for example, from the Turkish side. But in reality, each time Turks threaten, Americans quickly withdraw. Then it comes for the Russian role to come and say, we will stand between Turkish forces and Kurdish forces and protect Kurds from attacks. That is our role. Then when Turks say, okay, we'll not attack, Americans come back and say, okay, we are here, friends, we'll continue. That's the problem. And these issues should be dealt with politically, taking into consideration long-term solution, not what they want today, or not what they want just tomorrow. They should think furthermore. The situation is that now, for example, northeast of Syria, I'm sorry for taking this time, but this is an important question.
We have 1 more minute, I think.
Northeast of Syria, Americans have just good business there. They steal Syrian oil and smuggle it to one neighboring country, which is friendly to Russia, by the way. So this is business. It's not so huge, but it's enough for Americans, and they keep it going. I asked experts why these convoys with oil are escorted by American troops until they leave Syrian territory through Fish Habur. Why? Aren't the Kurds able to protect their convoys? And the response was that Kurds do not want this oil to go that way because they are forced to sell this oil very cheaply. Americans force them. And if these convoys are not escorted by American militaries, Kurds might sell this oil somewhere on the way. So that is the situation. For these very small things, for these very primitive interests of private groups and private companies, I would say, the issue of whole ethnic entity is on the table, and what happens to them is a big question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I would have loved to take more questions, but I've been informed that our time has come to an end. I want to thank all of you for your participation and presence, and to the Ambassador for his presence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.